Hello, I'm Karl Oakes, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Way of the Higher Self. This is a spiritual path of self-transformation with an emphasis on specific evolutionary practices. It's suitable for people in the early stages of personal growth, as well as for those who've been working their path for a long time. And I want to emphasize that wherever you are on your journey, I honor the work you've done to get there, and I'm grateful for your willingness to consider what's offered here. So, from that place of respect and appreciation, I'd like to ask you the following questions. Do you want to be more grounded, more loving, and more effective in pursuing your goals? Would you like to be freely and fully yourself, justifiably trusting that your words and actions will always be constructive? Would you welcome a relaxed and yet passionate life with real and rewarding relationships, uninhibited creativity, and commitment to a spiritual life task? From my own experience, I know that if you're willing to work this path persistently, it will give you all of that. If you'd like to join me for this and other episodes, I'll show you how. Hi, I'm Karl. I'm really glad you're here. Let's get started. This is part 2 of the introduction to the fourth practice of the Way of the Higher Self. Understand our life circumstances as spiritual effects. It will be really helpful to watch or listen to the episode, which is the first part of the introduction to this practice, if you haven't done so already, because there's some foundational material there, including a long, complicated story that I used to illustrate the way that our life circumstances connect to our thoughts and our feelings and our beliefs and our attitudes and the choices we make based on all of that. So in this episode, I'm going to lay out a systematic way of approaching really difficult experiences after the fact, or I suppose in some cases they might be slow motion experiences that you could use this while it's still happening to kind of unpack the whole thing and look at it as a reflection of internal states in you that could benefit from being kind of brought out into consciousness and looked at with honesty and compassion and allowed to evolve. So let me just go back and kind of recapitulate, review the daily review that I've talked about in previous episodes. Remember that when I was describing the first practice, Feel Your Feelings, the daily review just kind of consisted of a feelings check-in. In other words, a look back during the day on what had happened during the day to notice whether there were moments when maybe we did experience our feelings organically or when we might have interfered with them. And then if we interfered with them, to give ourselves a chance during the daily review to have a more genuine, organic experience of that feeling or feelings. And then in the next practice, which was observe ourselves with honesty and compassion, I added a piece which was looking back to see when was the lower self active. And the lower self, of course, is what we normally consider, what we normally refer to as negative characteristics, character traits like aggression or manipulativeness or dishonesty, things along those lines. Okay. And it's important when we look at that we do it with honesty and compassion. Honesty so we really see what's there, and compassion so we don't kind of encourage ourselves to forget what we've just learned about ourselves shortly thereafter because it's painful. And then the next thing I suggested that we might do, add to the daily review, I called it clearing with life circumstances, and which is also what I'm going to show you now, but I'm going to show you a different kind of version of it. And in that particular version, I was really concentrating on kind of interpersonal disharmony, times when you just have an interaction with somebody and somehow it brings up some kind of discomfort. You might be fear, might be sadness, might be shame, might be anger, something along those lines. And I gave you a whole checklist of things to look at so you could kind of lay that out and see what it was all about. And now I'm kind of still in clearing with life circumstances, but I'm in kind of a different version of that, which is, suppose you just have some really negative life circumstance, not just if you remember the episode, if you listened or watched it, I mentioned, a weird interaction I had with the guy behind the meat counter at a local supermarket, and how I spent some time afterwards, coming up with witty comebacks and all that, and wasting energy on that until I kind of ran it through the system to see what it was really about for me. This would be something more ongoing and significant, like, for example, getting fired, losing your job, or not having any money, or not being able to maintain good relationships, or something more along what does my life look like, as opposed to I had this unpleasant moment with somebody. And so that's what we're going to do, and we're going to start it off with the same elements that we had in the third practice, which is that we start off with what actually happened, and we're calling that data. And that's just what a camera and a microphone would record, because we want to contrast that with our judgments, which is how we interpret the experience. And it's important to be aware that that interpretation is not necessarily true. It's just what we're bringing to the event. It's not necessarily what the other person, what anybody else involved would say was really happening, and but it's based on our prior life experience, and it brings up for us feelings, which it's good to be aware of, and to let ourselves let ourselves feel. And then I was going to say those feelings tend to be fear, anger, shame, and sadness. Those are usually the ones that are involved in some kind of unpleasantness. And there may be shades and nuances of those feelings, but we don't need to have that kind of level of specificity in order for it to be useful to us. We can just use these 4 simple words. And then we can use that feeling to kind of go back in time when we get really in touch with that feeling. And sometimes we use something called bucketing to get in touch with it, which involves finding where the feeling seems to live in our body, and then connecting to what color the brain seems to want to give that feeling, and then giving it a sound, waiting for some sort of plausible, authentic sound to come up. Usually that helps to bring us back, and I talked about that in the introduction to the first practice, Feel Your Feelings. That tends to bring us back to what kind of childhood pain might be getting reactivated in the situation. And then I said that we should look at, or it's fruitful to look at what mirror there might be, what we might be projecting of ourselves onto the situation and reacting to negatively. In other words, maybe the person we're having the problem with is showing us something that reminds us of something about ourselves that we don't want to see. All right, so these 5 elements it's always good to start with. When you're dealing with a life circumstance, sometimes it's not always as neat a fit to go through these 5 as it is when you're just dealing with a single instance. But it's always good to get in touch with what am I feeling and how does that connect to prior life for me, and what aspects of myself might I be reacting to that I'm seeing in the other person. So that's all from the prior. Now we're going to kind of fork off and go in a different direction and ask 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. All right. So the first is, how might this fit a pattern in my life? And that, of course, requires us to be aware of the patterns in our lives. And so I'm going to suggest to you a substantial piece of homework around that, which I would think a lot of people would have resistance to doing, or might start doing and then drop. But I promise you, it's worth the effort. And that is to make a list of all the problems you've had in your life. And that's not something you do in one sitting. That's something you get a journal and and don't worry about doing them in order. Don't make it complicated. Just, it could be last week, it could be when you were 3, it could be everything in between. And just start. I said a journal. I'm thinking now a laptop might be a better way to do it, because what you might want to do then is to kind of group them into categories, problems with relationships, problems with money, problems with whatever. And if you do that work, eventually you'll start to see, wow, throughout my life, I've had these types of problems. You start to be able to classify them. And then you can answer this question more readily. You might be able to do it without, but it helps in answering that question. How does that fit a pattern in my life? So the next question is, do I have beliefs? Do I have related beliefs about life that this fits? And in the path work, we call these beliefs about life, these kind of convictions that we have, we call them images. And I could give you some random examples of images, but I'm going to do better than that. I did an images list years ago. It was a long time ago. It was maybe 2005. And I will share that with you. It's a list of beliefs about life which suggest a really unhappy person, and that's true. At the time, I really was, and most of these beliefs are no longer that active in my life. But to the extent that some of them are, I'll also talk about that. So I'll do that in just a moment. All right, so this is my image list. I think I might have done it in about 2005 or so, and there's about a dozen images here. These are general beliefs that I had about life as a whole at the time, even though intellectually I might have, been able to say, no, that's not really true. This is just, these were beliefs that kind of lived in me. There is no room in the world for me to be myself. If I really put myself out, I will fail spectacularly and be humiliated. Real pleasure comes from receiving without giving. People are too stupid to understand me. Any group I join will expel me. I am irretrievably polluted by weird and even evil impulses I cannot trust. I do not have and cannot get enough. I cannot withstand confrontation. Women want to control me. Anger makes me strong and invulnerable. I do not deserve to be happy. If I allow myself to enjoy someone or something fully, they or it will be taken away. I can't follow through on what I start. Everybody sucks, which really means everybody will eventually disappoint me or hurt my feelings. So all of that stuff was pretty alive in me then. Let me think about what still feels alive. People are too stupid to understand me. Well, let me talk about that one. Because this is one where I feel like I really have actually had some very important clarifying insight, which is that it's up to me to communicate effectively. I had this embedded demand that everybody else should really interview me and should work really hard to get to know and understand me. And that I shouldn't have to do a lot of work, to initiate and to explain myself. Rather, I should, I would answer all those questions truthfully and so forth, but it was up to other people to take the initiative on that. And there was a man I knew in the Mankind Project who really directly challenged that and said, if it's the communicator's responsibility to communicate effectively. And it was, at first I didn't want to accept that. And then he made a really persuasive case, and I guess I had to accept that he was right. And so I'm grateful to him for helping me understand that. Let's see. Group I join will expel me. I'll just say I'd be much more careful now about, does it make sense for me to be in this group or not? Do I want it? I think all of that's very foreseeable stuff. Irretrievably polluted, no. Can't withstand confrontation. I don't like it, but I can do it. Women want to control me. It's nonsense. I mean, that's just, I don't even want to start picking that apart. That's too much for this episode. Anger makes me strong and invulnerable. Clearly not. I do deserve to be happy. I have to, maybe I still have a slight kind of, a slight hit around everybody sucks, which really means everybody will eventually disappoint me or hurt my feelings. I guess I still have this kind of, when I read that, there there was this little inner voice that said, yeah, that's the way it is. But really, on the whole, this is not alive for me now. And I don't say that in order to say, yay me, I've made all this progress. I say that because this work works. Do this kind of thing, and images get challenged, and you get to really consider them and really think about, do they make sense, or am I just doing these things to myself, basically? And it's a real different perspective when you look at it that way. All right, so because yes, we are doing these things to ourselves, and we can learn not to. So, all right, that's enough on that. Let's see. Did I miss opportunities to avoid this situation? And I mean, this is always going to be a yes, I think. But, yeah, one has to come to it oneself. But I think when we get ourselves into really bad situations, unless it's, something, we're in a parked car and somebody smashes into us, okay, that's different. But generally speaking, the answer to this is going to be yes, and it's just a matter of figuring out how. If so, if I missed these opportunities, was I recreating childhood hurts? All right, let me explain that one a little bit, because that's not obvious. There is an understanding in the path work, which again is what most of this teaching is based on, that we have this compulsion to recreate painful childhood situations in our adult life so that we can overcome them, so that we can master them. There's a little echo of that in Imago, which says that if we were hurt by caregivers who had, certain kinds of deficiencies and so forth when we were children, we want now to have those caregivers love us in a better way. So we search for someone who can be a stand-in for that caregiver, and we always choose people with the same deficiencies, which is why we end up marrying our mother or our father. That's similar. This is a nice analogy I like for this, is that it's kind of like when you play video games and you get to level 6 and you fail. So you want to go back and you want to beat level 6, and you keep trying, and the more you fail at it, the more urgent kind of it feels like it to beat level 6 until you finally are able to do so. And in psychological terms, if you're able to do that with a childhood situation, that would be like belated mastery, basically, of a situation that was completely that was defeating as a child. The problem is, if you don't know that you're seeking belated mastery and you don't know any of what you're doing, what generally happens is that you just, you recreate the same mess and you get defeated again because you don't even realize that that's what you were doing. And then the last question, and this is pretty subtle and deep, is at any point was I taking negative pleasure in this? And that's a way of saying, did I have kind of a masochistic investment in this? And that might be a really difficult thing to admit, okay? Masochistic tendencies are, I think, are kind of embarrassing for a lot of us. They are for me, anyway. And so I don't like to admit this, but let me give you some background on this that might make it a little easier to go here. Again, in the pathwork, there's this idea that when we're children and we have very negative things happening to us, one of the ways that we survive those experiences is we are able to rewire ourselves psychically so that we feel pleasure in this uncomfortable, difficult situation. And that pleasure helps us to survive the experience. Unfortunately, then what happens is that there's a basic flaw in the way we assess situations going forward. One of the basic motivating principles in the brain is seek pleasure, avoid pain. Now, if things have been rewired so that a situation that ought to be registering as just pain is registering as, well, pain but also pleasure because we've rearranged things like that, the brain is going to now sometimes be drawn to that situation because it offers this kind of distorted, rewired pleasure. And that's kind of what we're talking about when we say negative pleasure, or that's one way of looking at what we're talking about. So this is the new set of questions, and I'm going to run through this with the story about Sue that I talked about in the previous episode, the first part of the introduction, which I'm not going to kind of summarize here other than in the very briefest terms. I'm just going to say I was in a nonprofit organization with someone who I have named Sue, who didn't take kindly to the fact that I tried to restructure her job because she seemed to me not to be terribly able to do certain things, although she did other things incredibly well. Very, very good at certain things. And basically enlisted a lot of people to view me as a persecutor and as someone who was treating her unfairly, and to create an environment where really my only option was to resign. That's as much as I'm going to say about that. So let's run through this. And I already told you all the stuff that I mined from that experience, because I was trying to illustrate that the world is a feedback mechanism that gives us an opportunity to learn about our interior states and about our choices by bringing us some unpleasantness. Now I'm just going to kind of pretend that I was going through that after the fact, using this system, and we'll see what I pull out of it. It may not be all of the things that I did pull out of it, or it may be new things. Who knows? So the data basically is, I had a conflict with this person, and then a steering committee meeting in which she said things about me which a lot of people seem to believe and which I considered to be untrue. My judgment about her at the time was that she was like this, like deeply evil manipulator. And my judgment about myself in that situation was that I was unable to speak clearly and advocate for myself, and that I caved in and let her roll right over me. My feelings, primarily shame, after which a lot of anger came in on top. The wound, all right, I didn't talk about all of this when I did it the first time. My mom would accuse me of all kinds of crazy stuff when I was a child. Not, deliberately, untruthfully, but she just projected. She imagined a lot of really sinister motivations, like when I was 3, and when my motivation was that I wanted an ice cream or something, and somehow she would come up with these elaborate stories about these sinister Machiavellian plots that I was running on her that, I even had trouble following what she was talking about. But so I think that's the real core wound. And then, things happened later in life, like I got accused of being the person who had hit this kid in the head with a rock when there was no way of telling who had really done it and everything. But it really comes back to mom. Um, and the mirror, the projecting part, am I a false accuser? I so wanted to say no, of course not. I would never do that. But then there was that thing about Clark the Narc in high school when I just completely laid that on this kid with no basis whatsoever. So maybe that was some long-term karma coming around, encouraging me to take a look back at that and really see that capacity lived in me. And also, I while I usually am quiet about it, I sometimes make very harsh judgments about people internally based on not enough information. So there is a mirror there. So how did this business about getting kicked out of a group fit a pattern? Well, I've I had that thing with the group turning on me when I threw the rock, and those kids, they lived in a housing project that was kind of next to the apartment complex that I lived in. They eventually ejected me from their project, kicked me out. Um, Oddly enough, for swearing too much. It was like a bunch of Irish Catholic kids, and they really got bent out of shape about me swearing, and then I did it to annoy them, and eventually they kicked me out. So how does that fit? The swearing doesn't fit exactly, but being kicked out of a group, um, I think I want to do. I would need to do a little bit more work around that one. Well, um, what's coming to me isn't like a super great answer to this, but it 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 is ringing some kind of bell that I knew um, that this organization was not a good fit for me. It wasn't what I had in mind. It had been my idea to start this whole thing. And I had a whole concept of how we were going to do things and treat each other with respect and all that. And then I was gone for a month. A lot of things happened when I came back. There were all these people there that I didn't know and hadn't really decided to do business with. And I stuck with it when, so that's jumping ahead to did I miss opportunities to avoid? And there's something that I can't articulate very well, but I think there is some kind of pattern there of staying in situations, in social situations, when I know that I don't fit. Oh well, like for instance, that thing about being in this um, kind of process group with this woman who hated me and all that. That's a really good instance of that. As much as I was attracted to it on certain levels, there was a real not fitting aspect too. And I never said anything about that. I didn't speak up and say, hey, you know what, there are things here that I see that I really don't like. So there you go. Okay, it took me a while. It was messy, but I got there. It's about not speaking up when I'm in a social group where I don't feel that people share my values. And so I'm just kind of setting myself up for trouble because I'm not saying and perhaps not choosing to leave when I should. All right. Do I have related beliefs about life? Yes, I do have this belief. I read it in that list that groups will kick me out. That was one of my images. Since this experience with Sue, that's what I call the woman in this thing, I've really, that's not an image anymore because I'm much more careful and would not put myself in a group that I don't belong in. Did I miss opportunities to avoid? Yeah, I kind of got ahead of myself on that. But clearly, when I was away for a month, when I came back, and there was this changed landscape, and things didn't feel like what I had in mind. All I had to do at that point was say, hey, you know what? I had something different in mind when I started this thing. What should we do about that? Like, should we split up? Does some people want to do this with me and other people do that with you folks? Or, I didn't have to be a big like war. It just had all I had to do was kind of put it on the table. So, and that's definitely a learning for me. Was I recreating childhood hurts? Yeah, going back to being kicked out of that housing project and stuff, which was also a misfit situation. Because, well, I don't know how much I want to get into that. I'll just say it was. So yeah, I think I was. I think there was a pain of being ejected from that group, which I was bringing back to myself. At any point, was I taking negative pleasure in it? I had to have been. I just know that I had to have been. I'm not super in touch with a moment of kind of feeling masochistic pleasure about this whole thing, but I know that I was in an uncomfortable situation for a while before this all erupted, and I wasn't doing anything about it. So I know that my pain-pleasure calculus was distorted, and that's not as good, I think, as really being able to feel back into a particular moment and knowing it. But I am aware of it. All right, so yeah, I don't know how that compares exactly to what I eventually pulled out of it after months of working with it, but certainly certain things came out, and there's no reason why you couldn't do this multiple times and kind of discover more each time you did it. So that's the process. I realize, it's a little complicated. It will get less so and less so as you do it. And I want to re-emphasize that this list of problems and this image list that you can derive from that will help you so much if you do that work. It makes so much of a difference. If there's a part of you that, resists, just consider that might be lower self saying, oh, I don't really want to change, or I don't want to change if it's going to take work. Believe me, it's worth it. Do it. You'll be happy. It will make you happy. So on that note, I guess we'll leave it there. I will figure out a way to kind of provide some kind of support for this one way or another, so that I want it to not be overly difficult to make this habitual, and at the same time, I really, really want to urge you to make it habitual. And so, if I haven't done something yet to support it, just watch this a couple of times. So write these steps down, and then practice it on something. The more you do it, the easier it'll be. And again, it will make you happy. All right. Thanks so much for listening and or watching all of that, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for giving your time and attention to this episode of The Way of the Higher Self. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful, and I hope you'll come back for more. Personally, I'd love for us to stay connected. If you feel the same way, I hope you'll subscribe to the Way of the Higher Self YouTube channel and or the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. You can also visit thewayofthehigherself.com, where you'll find a growing library of materials to help you manifest your most evolved and positive qualities. While you're there, Sign up for email alerts and we'll keep you informed as more content is added to take your practices to a deeper level. Until next time, no matter what life may bring, I wish you maximum progress on your path.